Tristan with Nerdette's NewsStand, and most of you know what a big Batman fan I am, and especially how big of a fan of the Arkhamverse and the Arkham games I am, and I recently started streaming Arkham City. Now that was before a few strikes, but I have since gotten them cleared up, and I am going to start streaming again soon. Now, as I was playing, I started to think over how Batman had been handled in these games, from Asylum to City to Origins and Night, and I came up with a shocking epiphany. Maybe this version of Batman is not as faithful of a Batman as everyone thinks he is. Now, we're going to go into a little bit of the psychology, but if you are new to the channel, don't forget to hit subscribe. As always, hit that like button. Let me know down in the chat or in the comments if this is later on below what you think of the Arkhamverse, what you think of ArkhamBatman, and if you think that character is true to form. Maybe I'll convince you otherwise. Don't get me wrong, I am not suddenly placing any hate on the game. I love them, and Batman, for the most part, is handled very well. But aside from Asylum, which could, on its own merits, perfectly fit in with the continuity of the comics version of The Dark Knight, the other three games really took Bruce and Batman in a different direction. A direction that seemed to hurt the character in the name of ass-kicking single-player gameplay. But why do I say all this? So let's go over a few things first, right? So let's start with how Arkham City changed things. Now, Arkham City is when things really started to change drastically. And this is when the Arkham series became its own continuity. Now, Tim Drake was Robin, but was much older. Batman was meeting Azrael for the first time, and it happened to also be the Michael Lane version and not the Jean-Paul Valley version, despite Bane making it clear he broke Batman's bat before, meaning Nightfall didn't happen exactly the way we probably thought. He's meeting Hugo Strange for the first time. Yada yada yada, I could keep going on. Those things are not a problem, not even a little bit. Having it be its own universe is perfectly fine. What isn't fine is how, due to the game being open world and still single player, how Rocksteady handled Batman's character to accommodate solo play and major ass kicking. Asylum was very linear. You only had certain number of crooks you needed to fight. They respawn if the story deemed it necessary, but once they were down, they were down. Here, that linear gameplay only applies on the story missions. Otherwise, the bad guys were always eventually respawning, and you can just fly in and take them out, haphazardly, right? And this isn't a problem either. What is the problem is writing Batman in a way that leads to a fight sequence happening. The worst offender of all being Mr. Freeze. Now, the boss battle with Mr. Freeze is amazing. Possibly one of the best in the series ever. Maybe second to the Deathstroke fight in Origins, but it leads to such unlike Batman characteristics that it makes no sense. Freeze refuses to give the cure to Batman unless he brings him Nora. Normally, Batman would agree to it, or point to the situation of how. I can't save her if I'm dead, or something, and then they would end up negotiating, right? Instead, during this situation, he decides to lunge for the cure, which makes a fight start then with Freeze, and then leads to Harley stealing the cure, and the two are fighting, and yeah, nice going, Batman, right? So, wow, that's the worst offender. There are still many others. To keep it a solo game, Batman is pretty much insistent and dismissive of anyone else joining in. He even pushes Robin away, saying he needs to protect everything outside of Arkham City and more. This would be fine if a lot of the writing did not come off like Batman was pushing him away because he can handle things better all by himself, like he had dibs on protecting the city. Now, another issue is how Rocksteady seemed to be of the belief that Talia was Batman or Bruce Wayne's one true love. Not sure, if Dini was in favor of this or not, but the way the writing of the two was handled, it came off no different than any of their usual interactions. Yet, we're told they were true loves, and Batman was willing to let Arkham City burn and the people die so that he could save Talia from Joker. Yeah, what the hell were you thinking, Batman? Oh, that made 0 sense. There was no conflict at all in the writing. It's like, let them die. I gotta save my girlfriend. And Alfred and Babs basically had to guilt him or force him to do it. And you can tell he was doing it begrudgingly so he could get back to saving Talia. So some could argue in this instance that Batman's aggression could be because of the disease he had and how he was desperate. Maybe, but that would only go so far, and a lot of these issues would come back even worse in Arkham Knight, and we're going to discuss the disease in its entirety here in a minute. So, that is sort of proves, though, that the characterization of intentional. It was intentional on Rocksteady's part. Unlike Asylum, in the ending, here it was so bittersweet, right? The bad guys were beaten and captured. So much devastated by Strange. Talia was dead. Joker's dead. And then, Harley goes off her rocker on a DLC and she's maybe pregnant and she's maybe got black hair. And it's just a mess, right? So, now, Origins. It solidifies a lot of these problems. And I want to talk about that. Origins is a great game. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I absolutely love Origin. The story is possibly the best in the series. We see a younger Batman in his first year having his first run-in in the Joker. Granted, we were promised Black Mask as the main baddie, but his story it's handled well. He also has to deal with the 7 assassins sent his way, and is still not trusting of cops, and is still hunted by them, and is being pestered by Alfred to rethink the whole vigilante thing. But, that is Alfred. So, because he is younger, he's much more ruthless in his tactics. He has little patience for people's crap, understandable, and he doesn't trust pretty much anyone. All of these are perfectly fine. It's acceptable here. But the problem is, so much of this just continues the trend that City set up, and Knight would continue then with. And while the game does set up a nice lead-in for the changes he'd go through in Asylum, right? Given how things were set up in this world with City and Knight, it makes things all the more glaring around how Asylum just stands out. Then there's Alfred. Alfred and his calls out to Bruce pretty much on point, making a statement looking back, he's hitting the nail on the head. You're not some hardened vigilante. You're a young man with a trust fund and too much anger. This, addition to some claims that Hugo Strange makes in City about how Batman, while justified in his anger, takes all of it out on the city. And seems to treat the city as it is a massive punching bag to let out his aggression. And given how we're able to just beat the shit out of the crooks, even those who do come off as sympathetic, even when we hear that banter back and forth, and given how aggressive this Batman is and how unreasonable he could be, it's really, really hard to argue. This is also the only other game that gives Batman a pretty solid victory at the end, right? He's starting to learn to trust and earned some trust, like with Gordon. Alfred has also come around after Bruce saved his life. However, later games, would make those lessons Bruce learns here, and that no man is an island, and he should accept his allies, become moot point in City and Night when he just pushes everyone away harder and harder. So now let's talk about Arkham Knight before we get into the psychology of it. Arkham Knight is when the problems really, really show. And I'm not talking about drone battles. I'm talking about Batman. I personally love the drone battles. But like I've been saying, a lot of the issues could be ignored or simply brushed aside for various reasons that fit each game. But Arkham Knight chose to take the ball and run with it past the end zone and out into the stadium, and they took all the problems with them. Batman in Arkham Knight is a complete asshat, a complete and utter manipulative jerk, and he fails so many times here. All right, one step at a time. Unless you're Alfred, Lucius, or Oracle, or Jim Gordon to some degree, Batman will keep secrets from you until he has no choice. Batman will take you for granted or push you away. Batman will brush you off and will rarely give you a compliment. I mean, that is more in line with Batman sometimes, but not to the degree that it happens in this game. Batman keeps on pushing Robin to focus on a cure for the Joker disease. Granted, it's because he's suffering from it too, but even so, when it reaches the point where he has to lie to Tim about Barbara's kidnapping and seemingly eventual death, he does it. He does it despite being called out by Alfred time and time and time again. And then, just because he wanted to make sure he was the one who got the job done, he locks up Tim. He cuts him off from Alfred for his own good. Yeah. What? No, I don't think so. So also, this game makes it very clear the brutal beatings you give the thugs on a regular basis, right? And this is nothing new. This is canon with how Batman usually does things here. This is just the Arkhamverse. Hell, even the Riddler reveals he has both a photographic memory and a perfect recollection that he sometimes wakes up screaming, remembering Batman having his hand around the Riddler's throat. Batman still does the same thing, yet time and time and time again. Now, a lot of this stuff can be chalked up to the Joker's influence due to the disease. More on that in a minute, but maybe so. Maybe so in some regards, but not in others, especially not with what is revealed about Jason Todd's backstory, right? Jason was kidnapped by the Joker and tortured and broken. We know this. This is pretty typical with the Batman mythos. And what does Bruce do while he's looking for Jason? He replaces him. Like, what? What? He replaces Jason with Tim while looking. Okay. Now, one could possibly say he probably did that to keep up with appearances, which would be fine, except for the fact that this means Bruce cared more about appearances and keeping the dynamic duo together more so than he cared about how Jason would react. Why make Tim Robin? Why not make him something similar like Red Robin? We've seen that done before. Something like that. If they did find and save Jason, he wouldn't have felt betrayed and then discarded. And here's the biggest one of all, right? Batman constantly loses it in the game. By the end, Batman has had his identity revealed to the world. He can no longer be Batman. Why is this? Because due to his own actions, Scarecrow was able to kidnap Tim, who Bruce left wide open to be captured and hold him hostage, forcing Bruce then to turn himself in or risk his and Gordon's death. Also, just about all of the most wanted end up either in Batman Captured, once more, probably, or they could re-escape. Sometimes you could kill them, or they could be saved, but you chose not to, or their lives were completely ruined by your action. Either way, there's no happy endings, no uplifting moments, nothing. And I know hope is Superman's thing, but you gotta get a little inspired by Batman every once in a while too. Above all else, is this what we want to see for the Batman? Fuck no. Now, is it still a powerful ending? Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's no denying it. But it's ending Batman of any type. It's not what any Batman deserves, right? It's just, okay. So, let's move on. As I pointed out, so many of these issues are out of character. They're out of character traits completely for Batman. And it boils down to the simple fact that a lot of things had to be altered and compromised to fit into a video game. You want to keep Batman solo? You can't have Robin running around unless it's like a specific fight, which we're kind of seeing happen tonight, right? And we've seen with him and Dick. So, you gotta keep the action going. You have to have Batman face all of the villains, even in one night. Even if you have to shoehorn a reason to cause them to fight. Finally, once you decide to follow up on a lot of these things you did, you decide to wrap things up. The only two options you can go with are utter defeat or absolute triumph. And Rocksteady chose the former. But in doing so, they doubled down and solidified all of the negative traits they gave Batman, and in the name of making a good game. And in doing that, they indeed gave us a good game, but a Batman that, while not the worst version of the character ever made, he is arguably one of the most inconsistent and radically out of character versions out there. Don't even get me started on the whole Joker-Batman relationship here. That could be a whole video in itself. But despite all of that, there is games out there that actually do it correctly. But as I've pointed out, many of these issues that are out of character really have an underlying issue, right? There is a lot of underlying issues here that I talked about, and one specifically was the Joker disease. If we're going to dig into the psychological perspective that was put on Bruce Wayne, we have to look at the underlying disease and see if that is the blame. So let's do that. Psychology is broken up into many categories. One specifically is abnormal psychology, or the study of unusual thoughts and behaviors that manifest into psychological disorders. An abnormal psychologist will study disease, such as schizophrenia or anorexia, and they seek to make things better through treatment and management of said diseases. They usually test subjects using simple criteria, such as audio or visual hallucinations, delusional thoughts, reckless behavior, or paranoia. But for the purpose of this video, we need to look at Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Yes, right. Okay, stick with me. In Arkham Knight, a few hours into the game, it is revealed that Batman suffers from this disease. We're going to call it CJD because I cannot say it correctly. I practice even, I promise. We learned that in Arkham City that Batman has also received blood with this disease in his body. This is why he pushes Tim so hard, and why we see hallucinations throughout the game of the Joker at his side, starting with the best reveal, in my opinion, when he is at Ace Chemical Plant, moving the canister and you turn around every time. It scares me every single time. But right after that, we play as Jim Gordon in a flashback when it is revealed that 5 other people besides Batman also suffer CJD and are slowly getting worse. The actual disease, because it is real, manifests in the mind, and after diagnosis, usually the patient only lives around a year until they completely succumb to the disease, usually head into a coma, and then pass away. There's no cure. It causes dementia and memory loss, or even worse. But you have to remember, for the sake of this video, that Arkham Knight takes place on one night and one night only. Same with Arkham VR. Arkham VR is completely... it's a great game. It's garbage for the character. During the whole time you're solving a mystery, you have to find out who killed Dick Grayson, and it ends up being you. You head down a rabbit hole of insanity and turn into the Joker. That's the TLDR. We wouldn't see the manifestation of these symptoms in 24 hours or less. There would not be a psyche break in 24 hours or less from CJD, even when the Scarecrow's fear toxin is added into the mix. And there is hints that he's losing it and breaking away from reality as you go on further in the game. It was used as a central narrative in the game, but would this be to blame for a complete break away from the character? We see and hear clear audio and visual hallucinations, and we see Bruce Wayne struggling to maintain his mind, and the Joker's influence becomes heavier and more diluted, and almost to the point where at the end, you completely play as the Joker. You have a Joker mobile, but again, let me reiterate, this is one night, and as much as I love this game, from a psychological perspective of changing his character within a narrative of Batman's getting worse, is complete and utter bullcrap. Had this game taken place over a month or a year, this would be a different conversation. But it was a simple tactic by the developers to make Bruce Wayne what they wanted instead of what the character actually is. But despite saying all of that, there is a different Batman video game out there that made some very, very drastic changes to the lore, had an M rating like Arkham Knight, and you still kicked ass in it, but it was true to the Dark Knight's character. And that is the Telltale Batman game. That Batman game changed a lot. Thomas Wayne was a criminal, no better than the mob bosses. And this shakes Batman to his absolute core. This is done in a way that I'd only ever want to see here, nowhere else. But it was done very, very well. We also get a Joker that can be a vigilante instead, right? Who thought that was a good idea? Or flipping the Joker and Harley relationship literally on its head. Here, she's a crime boss, and he falls for her and goes towards that villainy to win her affection, right? Stuff that in a comic book you'd be like, what the actual fuck? But when you see the context, when you play the context, you realize it is just as viable as anything else, and yet it does something Arkham Knight does it. It stays true to character. We could even include Batman in the Injustice series. And I mean the games, not the comic. They are radically different things, right? And I think this was done in a little different way because it's less how Batman is written, and it's more of how the universe is written around him, because they were really playing into Ed Boon's love for the character. The more evil Superman becomes, the more pure Batman becomes, to the point of dividing the teams into two different friend sets, and eventually going in head to head with the man that ripped the Joker's heart out, right? I mean, that's all I have to say about the Arkham Batman games, but nothing that happens in those games is Bruce Wayne and Batman. It is not also CJD. It is the developer's choice on how to write the narrative for a video game that is technically in name only. But yet we still love it. And it's because we get to put ourselves in the Batman's cowl. Or we get to put ourselves in Dick Grayson's tights. Okay? I'm gonna move on. Anyways, I really love these games, but I really wanted to share my issues that I had with it and kind of get that off my chest, looking onto all of the versions of Batman is entertaining. Maybe next time we'll go through and diagnose Joker. I don't know, that could be really fun. It could be really, really fun. Not CJD. I'm talking about his personality. Let me know, of course, what you guys think about the Arkham games as a whole. Or if you think I'm wrong. If you think these games are not just in name only, let me know in the comments down below, because I'd love to be wrong. As much as I love these games, they are not Batman. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye. Hey guys, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon and subscribe stars. You guys literally make this channel possible. Huge thank you to Cage the Mick, Robert Mick Twiz, Black Knight Fool, Brucey, Chris Z, David L, David Rafford, Jeffrey Allen Carnes, Mighty Paws, Mike Buckner, Maizen Barbosa, Ruskart, Ryan Decker, Robert Hoffman, and Doc Holliday. You guys are absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for all your support. Don't forget on the way out to like as always if you enjoy the content and hit subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.